Hello, everyone. I am Sarah Michel, and this is another weekly challenge to God. It's in fact my second attempt with this challenge. My first time, Australian internet let me down again, and my stream was cut in the middle. So I will start again from the beginning, which gives God a second chance to provide evidence that He exists and fulfill my challenge. So, as as you might have noticed in the video, this stream's topic is Hitchens Razor. Hitchens Razor was a concept named after the late Christopher Hitchens, which he used to say that which is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Now, it's a very interesting epistemological tool, in my opinion, a very useful one. But at the same time, it's often misapplied. And the purpose of this video, of course, is to give my opinions and my insight about how we can improve the usage of Hitchens Razor. And one of the main problems that I see when people apply Hitchens Razor is the criteria for evidence. Believers and non-believers, often when they are talking about evidence, they are not exactly referring to the same kind of evidence. And when, for example, a theist is making an ontological claim, the criteria of evidence is not the criteria that often an atheist or a non-believer is using, which is a scientific evidence. An ontological claim doesn't require scientific evidence to be justified. It's a different kind of evidence. For a believer, for a theist to justify their claim of God, their ontological claim, what they have to use is reason. And what they have to show is that their propositions are valid, are logically valid, and that their definitions are coherent. So you can still apply Hitchens' Razor in that case, but you have to demonstrate that the theist is not justifying their position. They are not presenting the evidence that is required to make an ontological claim. In that case, they are not presenting their arguments, and they're not making coherent definitions of their term. So if they refuse to justify their claims, then you can apply Hitchens' Razor. One way to make it more effective is to change the terminology. Instead of using evidence, you can use justification. That which is asserted without justification can be dismissed without justification. You can still use evidence as long as you make clear that the evidence that you are using in this case is logic. If the person is not justifying their terms logically, then you can simply dismiss it, and you don't have to address it. In fact, you can't address it, because how can I refute an ontological claim if the person is not giving me their reasoning for it? I just can't. It's impossible. I cannot refute it. So of course you can simply dismiss it, which is why Hitchens' Razor is so useful. But in order to use it, you have to justify it, justify the usage. In the case of another kinds of claim, and that is something that bothers me, especially when we are talking about Christian apologists, because Christian apologists usually make arguments for God that would work for a deist God. They're talking about a very abstract idea of God, when the God they actually believe it's an interventionist God. And the interventionist God, of course, has a different idea of evidence. When you are claiming that God cures cancer, for example, you are making a claim that requires empirical evidence, because you are saying that God has somehow interacted with matter and cured that cancer and got rid of, killed all those cancerous cells. You have to present evidence for that claim. One thing that especially Christians often talk about is that they reject polytheism. They would reject somebody claiming that Thor causes lightning and thunder, because the polytheist doesn't present evidence for that claim. They cannot present any empirical evidence, any scientific evidence that it is Thor that is in fact causing that phenomenon. Well, they cannot present any evidence that God has cured that cancer either. They are simply asserting that. And the criteria of evidence is the same to prove that God has cured cancer that Thor causes lightning and thunder. It's the same bleeding claim. So if they don't bother to justify how can an immaterial God cures cancer, and how can what sort of evidence, they don't have any testable, they cannot present any form of testing that God has is in fact the cause of the cure of cancer, then you can apply Hitchens' razor as well. Because then they're making a claim that requires empirical evidence, and if they don't bother to justify it, if they don't bother to present their evidence, you can simply dismiss it, because it's the same kind of claim. You're making a claim, and if you don't bother to justify it, how can I refute it? I can't. You have to prove your claim so I can verify your evidence, I can verify your arguments, and I can refute it. So, of course, this makes... The point that ultimately I'm making here is that Hitchens' razor is very useful, but it has to be justified. And the main thing that it has to be agreed upon before using Hitchens' razor, both parts has to be agree upon is which kind of evidence is being used. Once you agree with that, then both sides can use Hitchens' razor. Both sides cannot do the same thing. If you are making assertions and you don't present your evidence and you don't bother to justify it, the other side, in the case, I'm speaking as an atheist here, the theist side can also apply it. And that is why, that is how useful Hitchens' razor is, because it's not something that simply a skeptic or a non-believer can apply it. Anyone can apply it, because, if the other part is not presenting evidence or arguments, I cannot refute it. How can I refute that? I can simply dismiss it, because it's impossible to make any refutation. So, well, it's 7 minutes, counting with the other 7 minutes from the previous stream that didn't work out. It's been 14 minutes, and God hasn't fulfilled my challenge. God has failed once again. And as always, I'm ending the challenge. I'm not ending the stream yet. I'm going to go through the chat. I'm ending the challenge. God hasn't fulfilled it. Another evidence, another experiment proving that God doesn't exist. So I think for Chess, Progressive, Tiffany, and Christy, who have been through this, been on the chat, thank you all for watching. Let's see what Progressive has said. Have to understand the argument you're using. Absolutely. When you are debating someone, you have to listen to the other side. And that is something that it's what makes most debates so bleeding painful, because it's just somebody making a monologue and not actually listening what the other side is saying. That is something that is extremely annoying about debates. And yeah, absolutely. In order to make any refutation or do anything, you have to listen to what the other side is saying. Christy said, arguments are not the same as evidence, which is the problem. The theists don't understand the other side. Yeah, absolutely. Arguments are not the same as evidence, as long as, that is what I mean by evidence, though. Arguments can be evidence if you are making a rational, if you are talking about it rationally. If you are having a rational debate, then arguments are evidence. That is the word evidence doesn't have simply one definition. Word evidence depends how it's being used. It can mean that it's simply a deduction, a deductive argument that is completely abstract. If you are making a claim about theories, for example, theoretic physics, mathematics is evidence, and it's purely, and it's an abstraction, and it is evidence. So, of course, the criteria of evidence depends on what is being actually discussed, and is something that has to be agreed upon both parts in an argument before anyone can apply Hitchens' razor. So anyway, I hope that has helped explaining my view on this and maybe giving some interesting insight. I thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Cheers.